Greetings everyone, this is Daniel Gregg speaking, and I'm making another video for you, and I'm going to update you on the Genesis project. Currently I finished the English part of the translation to chapter 50, and I'm reformatting from chapter 38 or so on, which means moving things around. I made a couple videos on that. And I'm putting in accent marks, a proprietary accent system that's much more simplified over the Masoretic system, and that is on up to chapter 14 so far. Okay, so I got a little list here of things to go over, and it's going to be technical, but also you can get something out of it if you don't understand all the technical terms. Here's the first page of Genesis here. Okay, printed out in the current edit. Alright, so I'm a detailed-oriented person, and I might not be the best person in the world to teach this, but unfortunately I'm the only one that actually knows this. So you're going to have to stick with me until some of you learn some more. Okay, so we discussed that. I did not want to start teaching too soon because I've been working on some of the symbols and technical details on the presentation, and I didn't want it to change after I started teaching, okay? So that's why I've waited till this juncture, and I hope that not too much will change in the meantime, okay? So what got this project started, this interlinear project, is that I tried to teach a few concepts from Genesis, more or less, from the Book of Kings, more or less experimental, to see how it would go. And I was using the ESV interlinear, and of course I got disgusted with all of the mistakes in it and realized that it was no good for a platform for teaching. Okay. So I'm going to display on the screen here the first 3 words of Genesis with the interlinear translation underneath it. And we're going to go through pretty much everything they don't teach you in Hebrew seminary here that you need to know. But some things I'm going to assume you already do know. I'm going to assume you know how to have some basic pronunciation skills for Hebrew. But even if you don't, you can learn them quickly, or you can get a very basic book and that will catch you up. Where the mistakes are made, I will discuss. Okay, so our first word is Bereshit. Okay, so what's displayed in the text is better than my pronunciation, and I'll get to that point in a little bit. Okay, so the Masoretes made the mistake of overloading their accent system with too many meanings, as well as too many different accents, okay, that had to be figured out from the context and knowing the language ahead of time. Common symbols in this system, such as the schwa and meteg, have ambiguous meanings, for which a list of rules has to be learned before one can even pronounce a word. Okay, so in other words, you have to know the language before you can learn it. It's kind of a catch-22. One wonders if that was done on purpose. To get around this problem, I have deployed only 2 accent marks. Okay, a third mark is used for no accent, if necessary. Okay, so on this word Bereshit, there is a main accent and a secondary accent. So I got it on the screen for you. The main accent is the dark line above the sheen with the little curvy thing to it. Okay, so that's called a garish. Okay, and the secondary accent is the diamond-shaped figure above the resh. Okay, so that's a secondary accent. And so, okay, so those are where the words would have stress. Okay, so a secondary accent has less stress than the main accent. Okay. All right, I'm going to pause this. Okay, I was interrupted by the telephone. So we'll have to see where we are here. Okay. So the diamond is the secondary accent, and the garish over the sheen is the primary accent. So that's on the last syllable of the word, sheet, okay, sheet, and the secondary accent is on the second syllable of the word, reish, okay, and then the first syllable, b, doesn't have an accent. So that's the low tone. So we'd say Bereshit, Bereshit, okay? So now they don't usually teach you to say the aleph. So the way you say the aleph is you stop the air. It's called a stop, okay? So if you hear the pause in my voice, Bereshit, that's the aleph, okay? And what happens is that you just stop the air down here as if you were swallowing, but it's only really the beginning of a swallow. Okay, when you close the air passage, just a light tap, but a sheet. Okay, so other than stopping the air, it only makes the sound of air suddenly stopping. Okay, so that's your aleph. All right. Okay, so let's go by this list a little more because I'm kind of ad-libbing it here. All right. All right, so I mentioned about they overloaded their accent system, and we're only going to use 2 accent marks, which indicate, in the system I've designed, it only indicates syllable division and accent, and where the accent is, and those 2 features don't compete. And also I use them to indicate noon assimilation, but there's no ambiguity or confusion in the system. All right, so more on phonetics here. I discussed that. All right, so the aleph, I might as well read this. The aleph is the first word, and the first word has a phonetic articulation. Okay, it's called a stop. Stop the airfoil with the glottis for the briefest pause before saying the last syllable. There is also an aleph at the end of the second word in the text. So if you look at that, baro, finish the row by stopping the air by closing the glottis. Okay. When you begin to swallow, the glottis closes. Begin to swallow, but don't completely swallow. Abort it as soon as your throat tightens. Okay, so I realize many of you are going to treat the aleph as silent because that's what they teach in the schools. But in ancient times and in Arabic, which is the closest cousin to ancient Hebrew that there is, the aleph actually has a phonetic significance. It's not a silent letter, okay? So, okay, the aleph was articulated in the way I stated. Okay, sometimes this is significant for the meaning of the text. You will see it when we come to it. All right, so under the ba, or the be, we have a schwa. Okay, the schwa makes the sound of a and about, but that is just an English shortcut. Actually, the schwa, except with prepositions, okay, and a few other places, the schwa often represents a reduced vowel from the original word. And the reason the vowel it's reduced is because we've amalgamated the word with other words connected to it, and or the meaning of the word has been inflected. Okay, so the schwa actually represents a reduced version of the original vowel. Okay, so we can't just really say that the schwa in ba, you can pronounce it ba, be, bi, and it's all the same with the bait. But in the other cases, it actually reflects a version of the reduced vowel, a really shortened version of it, okay? So, all right, so I said more than I've written here about the schwa. Okay, so in the system I've designed, there's a silent schwa and a vocal schwa. Now, the Masoretic text uses one symbol for both, and you have to learn rules in order to distinguish between the two. I fixed it so that the silent schwa is in italics and the vocal schwa is not in italics. So here in B, it's not in italics, which means that you're going to put a little tiny short vowel after the bait. Okay, so it disambiguates the notation. Okay, so you don't have to deploy the rules in order to pronounce the word. Okay, so the first three words are Bereshit, Baro, Elohim. Okay, so please don't take my pronunciation as a stellar example of correctness. I have several handicaps. One of them is that I'm half deaf. Okay, if I don't see a person's lips, they are looking away or around, or if they're looking away or around the corner of a wall, I will not hear any unexpected words. This is to say, my mind is really filling in many words from the context because I actually hear fewer words than I think. Secondly, I was taught wrong when I was young how to say Hebrew, like maybe many of you are if you tried to take a class. In other words, that the Aleph is silent, that the Ain is silent. That's not actually the case. A confusion of Het and Het, which is really pronounced Het and Chaf, which I pronounce the same way, but they're really pronounced Het and Chaf, okay? And the wrong Vav for Wav, okay? So that is also a handicap because I learned some bad habits. I still say Vav when I have to think about saying Wav. And the reason that handicap perpetuates is because every time I have to listen to an audio recording for other reasons or hear other people say Hebrew, which is quite frequently, they're always using the European-influenced Vav rather than the ancient Phoenician sound Wav, which is what the original Hebrew was. Okay. Let's see what we got here. Okay. So I did have the opportunity to learn Arabic sounds from Arabic speakers when I was young in Morocco. So I can still say them. I just don't always chain them together in the most efficient way. If you want to hear a stellar example of Hebrew pronunciation, I suggest you check out the YouTube channel Aleph with Bait. Okay? All right, so now let's look at the English translation. The way most English Bible translations go, the word beginning should have a comma after it, and if they don't, one is assumed. In the beginning, comma. Okay? This is because the Masoretic text has a disjunctive accent at this point. But this is a most incorrect way to punctuate the text. Okay, so I've done away with all the Masoretic accent symbols, and part of the reason for doing that is because the accent symbols were also used as punctuations. Okay, so they were used for more than one purpose. And thirdly, they were used for cantillation, for cantillating the text. So that's three different purposes combined into one system of the symbols. And you can imagine that once you start overloading a symbol with different uses, purposes, and meanings, eventually it gets out of hand and you have to learn the rules and or already know the language in order to figure out what the symbol means, and which means that a learner of the language is stuck, okay, or has a very big hurdle to climb over. Okay, so I am using only a period and a comma, okay, for punctuation in the text. And actually it looks like a comma in the Hebrew text, and it is a comma in the English text, and it's a period in both texts, okay. So there should be no comma after Bereshit. All right. All righty. Where were we here? We are at 9 minutes. Okay, we're doing fine. All right. The word Bereshit is always used elsewhere in Scripture with the meaning in the beginning of. Okay. Now notice I have the word the in italics. That's for another lesson, but the Hebrew mind fills in definiteness in what's called a construct relationship, okay? So it would be okay to put the here, we just don't want to put a comma after in the beginning. We don't want to omit the word of, okay? So that's an expression of the Hebrew inflection, okay? Let's see here. All right, so the word bereshit, but, okay, see, habit, pronounced it wrong. Bereshit, okay, it's better. Okay, the word bereshit, okay, therefore comes after of in the same clause. Even the word reshit, without the preposition, usually has the sense of beginning of. One might suppose that in a few rare cases of absolute use of the word for first fruits, because the word can also mean first fruits, that the word was borrowed from a construct grammatical form for technical usage as first fruits. One might suppose that a holam is missing from re-sheet in those cases, so that it would be re-shiot in those few cases. Okay, but that's a possibility, is all I'm saying. My best guess is that bereshit is actually a construct form of rishon, okay, which be shown by the tav on the end of the word. In other words, a dedicated construct form which is different from the usual word. Okay, and I would say that because in context it is always used that way. All right, that's the norm. Page 2. Okay, so as we go through these Hebrew lessons, I'm going to discuss theology and philosophy and the actual meaning of the language. Okay, so you're going to get all put together in one. Okay, so it's kind of useless. And the way that I started studying Hebrew was because people were teaching lies that I discovered with a little study started to fall apart. Okay, and so that was the motivation for learning the original languages. All right, so I did everything with a theological question in mind. So I think the least I can do for you is point out the theological implications of everything we're saying and go faster over stuff that doesn't have theological controversies surrounding it or philosophical ones, and then go slower on the points that do. So the reason we're spending so much time on bereshit is that there are issues here, theological issues. Okay, so we're translating it in the beginning of. So all the philosophers and theologians who want to find an absolute beginning here, or the beginning of time, well, let's say the evidence of Hebrew usage or the norms of language are completely against it. So they want it to be taken absolutely, and they do that. They put a comma or they pause the phrase at the end of bereshit. Okay, when it shouldn't, it has an of on it, and it goes with the next word in the beginning of. So if you look in an online text or your cantillated Hebrew Bible, the backward comma, like Mark, next to the Hirik in bereshit, okay, that would be under the sheen, is a disjunctive accent. It is called a tifha, okay? So I said ha and not het, okay? So that would teach correct pronunciation of that word too. Tifha, okay? This can be flagged as the first definite mistake in the Masoretic accentuation. The beginning in Genesis 1:1 is just the beginning of the creation of the heavens and the earth. It's not an absolute beginning of time, at least according to the Hebrew. The next word in our text is baro. Baro. Okay, so at the end, you can do you can just stop, baro. Okay, so kind of like a sudden stop when the air just stops. That's your aleph at the end of a word. Okay, now in English we normally stop between words, okay? We put in a pause there, but the aleph is a little more conscious of that kind of stop, okay? The choice of vowel pointing, okay, is determined by what I stated to be the case with the first word of the text. An infinitive noun is required, okay? As an infinitive noun, baro means creating or creation, and it is followed by an implicit of when the subject follows, okay? Bara, which is what we have in the Masoretic text, will mean has created, okay, or past tense, bara. Baro will mean creating, okay, so that's the infinitive absolute, okay, and baro will mean create or creating. Baro, infinitive absolute, does not form a construct chain, okay? It doesn't take suffixes or prefixes or anything else. It just plain means creating. So when we want to construct something, we use a reduced form of this baro, infinitive absolute, to baro. We reduce the first vowel from a kametz to a schwa, okay, and baro. Okay, so now it's called infinitive construct. So we are left with baro as the only option. Reduction of the first vowel to schwa makes it an infinitive construct. Okay. Now, I have just knocked you over with terminology, okay, or you feel like that, take heart. You don't need to understand it in those terms. Simply stated, baro means creating of. And no one who knows Hebrew is going to deny it unless they are a fool or a demon. They might want to go with the bara, but remember the vowel points were put in the text starting around the 6th century BC based on a tradition. Okay, so let's go to the third word. Creating of Elohim. Okay, so the third word is Elohim. So now, how do you say Aleph at the beginning of a word? Well, what you do is you start with the glottis closed, okay, and then you just open it and let the vowel come out, okay, like it just kind of snaps out. Okay, that's how you do it. All right. So you start from a stop position. So Elohim. Okay. So again, we have a secondary accent. That's the diamond-shaped accent, and then we have the primary accent over the hey. Okay. So it's an ascending accent problem. It's an ascending accent pattern. Elohim. Okay. So that's how that goes there. Alrighty. Okay. Typically, this kind of, okay, so creating of Elohim. Typically, this kind of construction is a way of stating that one noun is possessed by another. For example, in English, books of him, okay, means his books. Okay, so creating of Elohim means Elohim's creating, or Elohim's creation, if we want to take the infinitive all the way to a noun. But the interesting thing about the infinitive construct is that it doubles both as a verb and a noun. Okay, so it wears two hats, so to speak. Okay, and it also is the short infinitive. When you put a lamed on the front, it means libero would mean to create. Okay, so some constructions it's being used as a straight infinitive verb as we do in English, and others it's being used as an infinitive noun. Okay, so someone might think that creating of Elohim means that Elohim is the object of the verb. Okay, and that Elohim is the one getting created. Okay, so without a context, this is quite possible in Hebrew, okay, and the Hebrew infinitive construct is actually used so that the following noun is the object of the verb quite frequently. Okay, but in the hierarchy of meaning in Hebrew, The sense that is tried first with a construct meaning is always the possessive one, like books of him means his books. Okay, so here it means Elohim's creating. Okay, so, and the rule should be, okay, and the rule should be the normal sense that makes good sense is the sense. So the normal sense, what's more normal than another is that which in the hierarchy of meaning is higher on the list of things to check. So in English, when we have something that has multiple possible meanings in isolation, the mind mentally goes down a checklist. The mind subconsciously tries the meaning that is the most common or popular first, and then it goes down the list automatically until one actually fits and makes sense. This is all a process that happens linguistically in the back of the mind, okay? So what happens is the construct is first tried as a possessive in the Hebrew mindset. Okay, so these default rules are important to our learning of Hebrew, and a lot of people just absorb them when they really get to learn the Hebrew. They absorb these default meanings. Okay, so I think maybe I should pause before the camera shuts off and just restart it here. Okay, so we've done our pause. So I was saying the default meanings can be learned subconsciously, but there's a drawback to this. When it comes to apologetics, you don't know how to explicitly defend a matter or an interpretation because you haven't what I would call formalized or intellectualized the subjective rule. Okay, so when people come along and they state outlandish senses of text, you have to know what the subjective default or norm is in order to show that they're being unreasonable, because the other sense that they're ignoring, the normal sense, actually does make good sense. Okay, and it's preferred by the language because of the default rule. Okay, so the next word, Elohim, is a big topic, and a lot of controversy surrounds it. But the controversy is solved by a precise knowledge of how Hebrew treats the concept of plurality. Okay, so I have not put down all the senses that Elohim can have here. I put Almighty's. Okay, but I put the best sense for the context. One reason for studying Hebrew is to make you aware of all the senses of a word, so that if more than one sense applies, you will realize it. Okay, a plural in Hebrew is normally a plural of number, unless some other factor indicates it could indicate a different kind of plurality. Okay, so this is another one of those subjective or default rules. A plural normally indicates a plural of number. So that's what the Hebrew mind will try first. Okay, so there are no other immediate factors in Genesis 1:1 to 2 to indicate that Elohim is a different kind of plural than that of number. Okay. Point 21. The verb baro. So you notice that I kind of flapped my R a little bit. Baro. Hebrew is more in line with that. Maybe a Spanish R, maybe or one in the back of the throat. Baro. Okay. Then the English R or rat. Okay. Rat would be more. Let's say the word rat with a little flap, okay, would be actually more correct. So, baro, okay, so that's why you're hearing me flap my R. Okay, so the word baro, which is an infinitive noun in the construct state, is not conjugated for person or number. It's a verb that goes with any number of persons, any gender, and any class of person. First, second, or third. That would be I, you, he. Okay, first, second, third person. So Elohim can be understood here as Almighty's in the plural, with no verb-subject conflict. Okay, so in verse 3 we will see that things are different, but we haven't got there yet. Okay, so I do believe that Yochanan was aware of this when he wrote John 1:1, which is why he can say the Word was both with the Almighty and the Almighty. It was because the Word, Messiah, Yeshua, okay, was also present and involved in the creation of all things at the beginning. Okay, so also the plurality of the Most High is indicated later in this same chapter, but I will wait until we get to it. Okay? I do support the concept of the unity of Elohim, but not the idea of singular personhood as we humans view it. Unity has other senses, though, but I don't want to digress at this point, because to do so would keep me from highlighting the features of Hebrew. Don't want to devolve into that much theology. We just want to help you realize what the text really says and what it really doesn't say. Okay, page 3. Last page. Okay. The concept of plurality in Hebrew can be represented by the multiplication symbol. Okay, I have it 2 times in the word Almighties in the text. Okay, the plural in Hebrew means to multiply something, and not just in respect to number. That's just the most common result of multiplication, or ot, or other forms of plural. The plural in Hebrew also may multiply the intensity or force of a word into a kind of superlative sense. The second multiply symbol is tagged at the end of the plural of the number, in other words, the IES in Almighties. This corresponds to the English plural. But the first times tags the all part of Almighty. Etymologically, Eloah means something like mighty or powerful being. If you pluralize it, then its force can be multiplied so that you get most mighty, or almighty, or all-powerful being, or what we would call a divinity. However, point 26, it is not mandatory to multiply a Hebrew plural in this way. It is just frequent enough that in the case when the context allows it, other Elohim may be just very mighty and not almighty. In other words, the plural can multiply the degree to a less than an infinite degree. Okay. So when we speak of false gods, we are just speaking of very mighty demigods and not the true Almighty. Okay, so far I have indicated 2 kinds of plural in the word Elohim in this Genesis 1:1 text. The plural of intensification and the plural of number. Okay, if all else fails, there is one more kind of plural in Hebrew, which I should mention, and we shall come across quite frequently in Hebrew, and also in this same chapter later on. Often a singular word in Hebrew will be used in a collective sense for a plural class of objects. There are a few examples of this in English. The hailstone pelts the roof. Okay, that's one example. I've used stone there in a grammatical singular, and I put the verb in a grammatical singular, pelts the roof, but we know in reality that the stone refers to multiple objects hitting the roof. The hailstone pelts the roof. Next 2. Hey, boss, do you want me to spread all of this stone on the driveway? Okay, so he uses the word stone. This, he doesn't say these stones, he says this stone. Okay, he's not talking about a singular stone though, he's talking about a pile of gravel. All right, but he could call it the stone. So English does this. So Hebrew does this sort of thing with singular words all the time. So while we find rare English examples, in Hebrew it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere and all the time. Okay? Not absolutely, I mean. Okay, but compared to English it is. Okay, for this reason, okay, and we'll cover some concrete examples of that later so that you actually see that this is a feature of the Hebrew language. Okay, for this reason, that is the reason that singular words may be used with a plural sense. I never translate them as plural in this interlinear, because then I would be covering up the usage with English. But I still need to call such attention to such usage. So what I do is I put the word in small capital letters, okay, and I call that the generic, okay. Okay, so you see here that Almighty is here in small caps. So if, so if the plural ending is regarded only as a plural multiplying intensity, so that in respect to number it's a singular word, such that the word is equivalent to a singular form, such as we see in Genesis 1:3, where I just translate Almighty. I don't put the plural on it. In fact, most of the time I just translate it Almighty, because there's a verb that goes along with it that's conjugated singular. Okay? Okay, in Genesis 1:3, which it's going to read, then says the Almighty, okay, then it may still refer to a plurality of objects in the way I have used the word stone in the previous examples. Okay, technically I should not have put Elohim in small caps, where I have indicated a plural of number. Okay, since the plural translation indicates that we do not have a generic plural, i.e. that a singular word, what is just a singular word used as a plural. However, I have made an exception. I have done so for an apologetic reason. And that reason is this: if the word Elohim is regarded as singular where it is properly plural and number, then there is nothing to prevent it from being a generic plural. In that case, that is, the word can be singular, and if so, it can still refer to a class of plural objects. So really, the language isn't going to tell us theologically what lies behind a word, okay, the word Elohim, what the composition of God is, okay. We have to get that from other parts of Scripture and stories and representation. And Genesis, of course, is got quite a few instances of Elohim being displayed in ways that don't appear to be singular. Okay, and in the same chapter, later on, the word us is used several times, referring to Elohim. And we'll discuss those when we get to them, okay? But the purpose of this is to teach Hebrew, okay? Teach you everything you didn't learn in seminary. Okay, so this is Daniel Gregg. Thank you for listening. Over and out.